Greg has done some things that I don't think that's in the best interest, of our game, and we're coming back to probably the most historic and traditional place in our sport, and I believe it was the right thing.
Golf is a sport built on respect, on tradition, on shaking your opponent's hand no matter how badly they beat you. It is a sport where players are expected to carry themselves with dignity, to honor the game above all else, and to treat the people around them with class. That is the standard. That is what golf has always stood for. Not just on the course, but in the locker room, in meetings, and how you speak about your peers when the cameras stop rolling. But then you say one name. You say Greg Norman, and suddenly the legends of this sport, men who spent their entire careers holding themselves to the highest possible standard, drop that standard completely. They say things they would never say about anyone else. They use words they would never normally use in public. Because when it comes to Greg Norman, even the greatest players who ever lived will look straight into a camera and basically say, no one likes him. Top PGA legends turned on Greg Norman, and not just because of business. It got deeply personal. 6 of the most respected figures in professional golf history have each had something to say about this man, and every single one of them tells a different part of the same brutal story. And if you want to back this kind of story, why, hit the hype feature right now and give this video some hype while we keep going, because this one goes deep. The story does not start with money. It does not start with LIV Golf or Saudi Arabia or any of the headlines you have seen in the last few years. It starts in 1994 at Sherwood Country Club in California, where a younger Greg Norman stood in a room full of the most powerful people in professional golf and told them he had a better idea. He called it the World Golf Tour. It would feature the top 30 players in the world, 8 events a year spread across 4 continents, with winners' prizes of $600,000 at a time when the average tour prize was less than a third of that. On paper, it sounded like progress. In that room, it felt like a grenade. The PGA Tour's response came before Norman even finished speaking. Commissioner Tim Fincham had already sent a memo to every player on tour, warning that anyone who joined an unauthorized rival circuit would face immediate suspension. They called it the guillotine memo. It was a clear message: fall in line or get cut out. But the moment that truly ended the World Golf Tour, the moment that shaped the next 30 years of professional golf, did not come from a memo. It came from a man standing up in that room and walking out. Arnold Palmer was 65 years old at Sherwood. He had long since stopped competing at the highest level, but his authority in that room was absolute. When Palmer spoke, everyone listened, and what Palmer said that day was not about finances or field sizes or television deals. It was about something much older than any of that. He invoked the legacy of the Big Three himself, Jack Nicklaus and Gary Player, and he reminded everyone present that they had been offered their own chances to break away, to take the money and build something entirely separate from the tour. They had said no every single time, not because they could not have profited enormously, but because they believed the tour was worth protecting. Palmer told Norman he would not support the plan, and then he walked out of the room. Norman later described himself as shell-shocked. He said he felt ostracized by the very men he had looked up to. And from that day forward, the narrative around Greg Norman began to harden into something that would never fully soften. Number 6. Fred Couples. Fred Couples is not someone known for sharp words. He is relaxed, he is liked by nearly everyone, and he generally keeps his opinions about other players to himself, which is exactly what makes what he said about Greg Norman so remarkable. During the height of the LIV controversy, Couples did not talk about business models or tour policies. He went straight to the personal. He said that no one has liked Norman for 25 years. He used the word insufferable. He was not speaking in hypotheticals. He was not speculating about what other people thought. He was stating plainly and directly what he had observed across a career spent in the same circles as Norman. According to the report's analysis, Couples' core complaint is about the gap between who Greg Norman appears to be in public and who he actually is behind the scenes. The great white shark persona, the charisma, the easy smile, the way Norman carries himself in front of cameras, none of that matched what Couples says he witnessed when the cameras were off. The word the report uses is prickly. Another word it uses is churlish. Couples believed that Norman had a self-professed expertise on everything, an arrogance that extended beyond golf into every conversation, every room he walked into. And for Couples, the fact that Norman ended up leading LIV Golf did not surprise him at all. It was not a man trying to grow the game. It was a man with a very large ego finding a very large stage. Number 5. Tiger Woods. Tiger Woods does not do personal conflict in public. That is almost a rule with him. He has spent his entire career saying the right things, deflecting controversy, keeping disputes private. So when Tiger Woods looked into a camera during the LIV era and said that Greg has to go, people paid attention, because that is not the kind of thing Tiger says lightly. That is not the kind of thing Tiger says at all. The report frames Woods' opposition in terms that go beyond professional disagreement. According to the analysis, Woods believes that Norman is not actually trying to improve professional golf. He believes Norman is motivated by a decades-long desire to damage the PGA Tour, a vendetta that has been building since 1994. In Woods' view, the personal animosity Norman carries toward the tour is so deep, so ingrained, that no real negotiation can happen while Norman is in charge. It is not that the two sides disagree on terms, it is that one of the people at the table, according to Woods, is not negotiating in good faith. He is settling a score. This is worth sitting with for a moment. Tiger Woods reportedly turned down an offer somewhere between $700 million and $800 million to join LIV Golf. He said no to that number because he believed the tour and its history were worth protecting. He bet his financial future on an institution he believed in. And then he looked at the man leading the other side and said he needs to be removed before anything can be resolved. When someone who just turned down nearly $1 billion says the problem is not the money, you probably believe them. Number 4. Rory McIlroy. Rory McIlroy did not start out as Greg Norman's enemy. That is the part of the story that the report highlights as particularly revealing. In the early days of the LIV conflict, McIlroy was actually one of the more measured voices. He was diplomatic. He tried to see multiple angles. He left room for the possibility that conversations could happen, that the two sides could find some kind of common ground. And then Norman called him brainwashed. According to the report, the specific turning point came when Norman told the Washington Post that McIlroy had been brainwashed by the PGA Tour. The word itself was the problem. It was not just a disagreement. It was a suggestion that McIlroy was not smart enough or independent enough to form his own opinions. It was condescending in a very public way, and it came after what McIlroy apparently felt had been a private exchange where Norman had seemed reasonable and even warm. The switch felt dishonest. It felt like a betrayal of a private conversation. Yeah, McIlroy's response was not subtle. He said he would make it his business to be a pain in Norman's backside for as long as this fight continued. He described Norman as using players as pawns in a personal war. He was not talking about tour structures or broadcast rights anymore. He was talking about character, and he had decided based on that one moment that Norman lacked it. Number 3. Davis Love III. Davis Love III has a specific kind of credibility in this conversation. He is not just a PGA Tour loyalist talking in general terms, he was actually there. He was the one sent to summon Greg Norman to Arnold Palmer's office in 1995, the meeting that followed the fallout from Sherwood. He has a long memory of Norman's behavior, and he has watched the same patterns repeat themselves over 30 years. What Love III focused on? Now, according to the report, is honesty. Not strategy, not money, not the structure of professional golf. Honesty. His specific complaint is that Norman told younger players things that were not true, particularly around the legal protections available to them if they joined LIV. Norman reportedly claimed the PGA Tour could not legally suspend players who defected. Love III called that claim so untrue. He believed it was a deliberate attempt to mislead players who were young enough or uncertain enough to take Norman at his word and make career decisions based on information that was false. For Love III, this is what makes the Norman situation different from a normal business dispute. A normal business dispute involves two sides with different interests but good faith arguments. What Love III describes is one side telling lies to gain an advantage at the expense of players who trusted them. He used the phrase that it fractured the game's soul. That is not language you use about a contract disagreement. That is language you use when you think something genuinely wrong has been done. Number 2, Nick Faldo. Nick Faldo and Greg Norman are linked forever by one moment, the 1996 Masters. Norman entered that final round with a 6-shot lead. He had the tournament in his hands. And then, hole by hole, it slipped away, and Faldo, grinding and relentless and completely unmoved by the pressure, came from behind to win. It is one of the most famous collapses in the history of the sport. Faldo has spoken about Norman's mental makeup in terms that go beyond that single event. The phrase the report returns to is moral fiber. Faldo's argument, shaped by years of competing against Norman at the highest level, is that Norman's public confidence was always something of a performance. The swashbuckling style, the charisma, the big personality, it looked like the real thing from the outside. But under genuine pressure, according to Faldo, the substance behind the performance was not there. He believed the gap between Norman's image and his inner toughness was the real story of their rivalry. In the context of LIV Golf, Faldo's view follows a consistent line. He sees Norman's choice to lead a rival circuit not as a visionary decision, but as another version of the same act. Chase the spotlight, make the big move, prioritize the dramatic gesture over the quiet, disciplined work of actually building something lasting. For Faldo, Norman has always been more interested in being seen as important than in doing the hard, unglamorous work that truly important people do. And in golf, Faldo believes, the hard work eventually tells the truth about everyone. Number 1, Jack Nicklaus. If there is a relationship in this entire story that captures just how far things have fallen, it is the one between Greg Norman and Jack Nicklaus. For 40 years, these two men were close. Nicklaus was a mentor. Norman looked up to him. They were, by every account, genuine friends. and then everything broke. Nicklaus was offered more than $100 million to serve as a frontman for LIV Golf. He turned it down, not after long deliberation, not with regret. He turned it down and publicly reaffirmed his loyalty to the tour he had helped build from the ground up. To Nicklaus, the offer itself was almost beside the point. His legacy was not for sale at any price. Norman's response to that rejection is where the 40-year friendship ended. He called Nicklaus a hypocrite in an interview with the Washington Post. He claimed that Nicklaus had attended a LIV presentation and sent an email saying the league had his blessing and was good for the game. Nicklaus and his team disputed this entirely. They said the meeting was a courtesy arranged through his son because of Saudi golf course design contracts, and that Nicklaus had zero interest in the project once its full implications became clear. The conflict deepened in a way that most people did not see coming. The Nicklaus Companies, a business entity in which Nicklaus no longer holds a controlling interest, actually filed a lawsuit against Nicklaus himself. Their argument was that they had to step in to protect him from involvement in something that could permanently damage his reputation. The report describes the final outcome simply. Nicklaus emphasized that his loyalty to the tour he helped found was not for sale, and the respect he once held for Norman was gone completely. For the people who study this conflict, the Nicklaus breakdown is the detail that makes everything feel real. Business disputes happen. Public arguments happen. But when a 40-year friendship ends, when a man who once mentored you publicly calls you a hypocrite, and you respond by saying the meeting was a courtesy, and you had zero interest, something much deeper than a business disagreement has taken place. The report's analysis of all of this lands on a phrase worth repeating: historical trauma, personal distaste, and institutional preservation. Those are the three forces the research identifies as driving the collective opposition to Greg Norman. They are not the same force. They do not all come from the same place, but they point in the same direction. The historical trauma is what Palmer and Nicklaus carry. They built something. They made sacrifices to build it. And then a man they respected tried to dismantle it in 1994, and again in 2022. To them, it is the same fight with a bigger budget. The personal distaste is what Couples and Faldo describe. Nothing to do with tour structures or legal arguments. Just a man whose private behavior did not match his public image, and whose arrogance wore on the people around him over decades. The institutional preservation is what Woods and McIlroy represent. A new generation that did not live through 1994, but that has decided the tour is worth defending, and that Norman's leadership makes peace impossible. Put all three together, and you get 30 years of a conflict that never fully resolved because it was never really just about one thing. Every time it looked like it might cool down, something new happened. A comment to a newspaper, a phone call described differently by two different people in two different interviews, a friendship that began as mentorship and turned into a public dispute and then a lawsuit. The layers kept building on top of each other until the weight of them became impossible to ignore. Golf as a sport has survived all of it. The tour is still operating. Great players are still competing every single week. Fans are still watching in huge numbers. The game itself is bigger than any of this. And that is probably the most important thing to hold on to when the noise gets loud. The legends who pushed back against Norman did so because they loved the game enough to fight for it, even if the fight got ugly, even if things were said that cannot be unsaid. The hope, and it is a very real one, is that professional golf finds a version of itself that does not require one side to destroy the other. The players coming up right now, the ones who were teenagers when LIV launched, will inherit whatever structure ultimately survives this era. They deserve a game that works. They deserve a game that honors what Palmer and Nicklaus built, while also being big enough and modern enough for what comes next. The conflict between Greg Norman and the legends of the PGA Tour has already shaped the history of this sport, more than most people fully appreciate. What happens next is still being written. If you have made it this far through the story, leave a comment below with your honest take on where the blame actually sits. Subscribe if you are brand new, and we will see you in the next one.